Welcome, everybody, to the Troubadour podcast. Today, I have a special guest, Alexandra York, and we're going to talk about her new book, Soul Celebrations and Spiritual Snacks. I highly recommend this book, and we're going to talk about what that is. And before we get into that, I want to explain a little bit about who Alexandra York is. Very, very interesting person. So I'm glad to have been introduced to you in the last couple of months because you have such a great corpus of work to delve into now that I've gotten into your work. So Alexandra York's books have been published in the US, Canada, England, Australia, Mexico, Russia, and Spain, basically all over the place. She has 6 years as an editor for Arts Ideas, a quarterly arts and culture magazine published by American Renaissance. And she is the founding president of art21.org. So you could find that, and we'll actually discuss this on the show later because there's a lot of great stuff on that website. Go to www.art- that's the dash, the horizontal dash, 21.org. That's art21.org. And she's currently has a monthly art and culture column for newsmax.com. She's appeared all over the place on the Today Show, the Larry King Live Show, To Tell the Truth. He goes on and on and on. There's so many great AM at Philadelphia, Wake Up Houston, ABC's Eyewitness News, and all over the place sharing these wonderful ideas and these soul celebrations. Now, this isn't all you've ever talked about. This is your most recent book, but I thought we would dive in with this book, Soul Celebrations and Spiritual Snacks. So, but first, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well because the sun is finally out.
Yeah.
I'm at my Bucks County, Pennsylvania country home, and it has done nothing but rain for days. So since nature is a spiritual experience, I'm finally experiencing spring.
Yes. Yeah, I think I'm in the Bay Area, and it's the same way. It's actually been pretty dreary and rainy, and now it's finally out. And I think that actually leads into some of the reality. You said the nature is a spiritual entity, but some of the reality of what we're dealing with today in 2020, it is, what is it? It's actually April 1st when we're recording this, 2020. And for me...
Yes, but this is not an April Fool's joke, right?
It's not an April Fool's joke. Yeah, this whole thing. Goodbye. Just kidding. So not all is wasting your time. No. We're actually in... a really interesting time, as everybody knows. And I've talked a lot on the show about, the virus and the shutdowns and all this stuff. And I thought we could take a step back and talk about some ways to celebrate life, to celebrate your soul, and to, and what that really means in today's world. But so my first question for you, Alexandra, what we could start discussing, in terms of what a soul celebration and a spiritual snack is, what can people do in today's environment where, for me, I'm quarantined for the most part in the Bay Area. Everything's shut down. Parks are shut down. Hiking trails are shut down. I can't go to museums. And like you, I love museums, and we'll talk about art. So what do we do? How do we get, what is a spiritual snack, and how can we get it when we can't go outside?
Well, you're talking about nature in particular, and since my thesis is based on the premise that a secular spiritual experience, whether it be a major soul celebration or whether it be a little quickie snack, what we are doing in order to stimulate that emotional, physiological experience is to connect with our deepest values with some external entity that embodies those values, or our perception, for example, of nature. So I believe we can have these experiences via nature, via art, and via a beloved, romantically beloved person. So as far as nature is concerned, if you are anywhere near where you can look out and see this beautiful spring coming, that in itself is a moment of rebirth. It reminds us that nobody can shut nature down. Nobody can quarantine nature. nature is going to bloom everywhere around us. My magnolia tree is gorgeous. The weeping cherry is coming, and the 300-year-old sycamore is just thinking about it. And the other thing you can do, if you can see birds at all, this is their nesting period. So they're busy, they're singing to each other, and they're flying around trying to find a place. And all of these things, if you love nature, if you love our planet, if you love the universe, then when you focus on these things, you actually feel as if you're part of eternity. You really do. You walk away saying, I have touched the universe. If you look up, even from your apartment window, if you can see the sky, you can float along with one of those clouds and say, I am part of eternity right now. That is a really spiritual, uplifting, empowering, expansive moment of being alive.
Okay.
So for nature, it's everywhere. Even if you live in an apartment, I don't know what it's like in other cities, but in New York, grocery stores have flower stands. So when you go to get your toilet paper, you can pick up a bouquet of flowers, take them home, arrange them, and then just contemplate the beauty, the fragility, the gloriousness of one flower, and it makes you feel alive.
Yeah, I agree. So, I think that's really helpful for as a reminder. I do live where there's nature at least somewhat close to me. I have like a backyard with a garden, so that's nice.
Aha.
Not everybody has that. Like you said, there's some people, if you're in like a concrete jungle area and you can't leave your house, I mean, the most you get is the sky. But at least it's something, and it's a way to get a little snack, like you're saying. So
Exactly.
that's one way. And I thought we could get into what you mean, because you mentioned the term secular spirituality, and what exactly that means. Because I've had this, I have a literature podcast, as you know, and I have had this conversation with people as someone who, I consider myself secular. When I talk about soul all the time, I talk about spirituality, I talk about the spirit. And most of the people I talk to, most of the audience members that I have are going to be, are going to have a religious tendency, and they automatically go to that view of the eternal soul and the soul created by God and things of that nature. In your book, you make a good understanding of this is for everybody, including people who are religious and not religious. But how do you understand secular spirituality and how that can apply to someone who, believes in the immortality of the soul and maybe even the pre-birth creation of the soul versus someone who believes in none of that?
That's one of the things that excites me about this thesis of mine, because when I was devising it, I wanted to offer something to everyone. And one can be completely very religious in any religion. In fact, I usually have 3 beta readers for my work. This time I had a platoon because I needed to get feedback from a very religious Christian, a sophisticated Jew, an atheist, a psychiatrist. I had every pocket filled for my feedback, and every single person who read the manuscript adopted this theory into their lives, and it didn't compete with or threaten any of their other belief systems. So this type of spirituality can be experienced by anyone and everyone because it's based on personal values. And everybody has values. It doesn't matter what your worldview is. You have values that you live your life by. So, and other kinds of secular spirituality. So that's how I include religious people. It's a spiritual experience of a different kind. And as far as secular people is concerned, most secular spirituality theories have to do with Jung or Freud or meditation or the occult or something that puts the mind into a trance-like position or reaches the subconscious. I don't believe the subconscious exists, but that's a different subject. But my theory is very alive, very awake, very participatory. So in those regards, I deviate from the secular spirituality theories and I add to the religious experiences.
So when you talk about values, I'm interested because I think the term kind of gets, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of people, sometimes can get confusing what you mean by values exactly, right? So you say everybody has values. Can you give some examples or what you mean by values? And I have some in my head, but I always often think like, okay, so somebody says they value gun rights, right? Is that a deep value, or do political values, what if I value really soft comforters? Is that a deep value, or you know what I mean? So if I maybe value and maybe you could say that the value is comfort, right? But I just try to get a deeper concrete idea of what we mean specifically by everyone has values. Because yes, everybody has values in the sense that we all value, the fundamentals of, food and water, right? And maybe you could go, what is Haslow's hierarchy? You can get into the relationships, you can get into sex, things like there's certain base needs those are things that everybody values. But we're also talking about, I think when you talk about values in your book, you're talking about something else. And it's that something else. And I think that's related to the spiritual part of humanity, right? So the physical needs are somewhat obvious sometimes, but these spiritual needs are not always obvious. And I was wondering if you could dive into what you mean by values in that sense.
Yes, that's a good question, because the things you mentioned, the comforter and whatever else it was, yes, those are superficial values, but if you peel them back and keep going down, 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 you will get to what I call your primary values. Mm-hmm. And for my definition of soul, in a secular manner, we need look any farther than the Latin for soul, which is anima. Mm-hmm. And I define the secular soul in terms of values by saying that our deepest value is our primary animating principle. So values come from principles. And the deeper the value, the deeper you, many people think that passion is a lot of emoting, but that isn't what passion is. Passion comes, your enormous dedication to your values. That's what brings out passion in you, because you value that value so much. Mm. And a really fun test that I have in the book, which I came about it years ago. I have no idea. It just popped into my head one day. And I said, you know what? Wouldn't it be interesting to pare down my value system to one word? And if you do that little exploration, that introspection into your value system, you will definitely, I assure you, because I've tried this on so many people and I've even given workshops on it, on this subject. And if you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, you will come to one word who defines your animating principle, who defines your deepest self. Now, my own word is truth. My husband's word is independence. Some of my beta readers' words were relentless, courage, fortitude was one, curiosity was one. So you see, if you That's how you get to your animating principle. From that, that's a basic definition of your self.
Uh-huh.
Capital SELF. That is who you are. And then, as Thomas Aquinas said, the things that we love tell us what we are.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go out and you identify with the things you really love, and that will even give you more information. Because if you introspect consciously, you might miss things, but the emotions will always tell us the truth.
Yeah.
And what you feel most about. Now, whether that's based on reason or based on other things, that's a different question. But it will define your deepest self for you. And from that base, you can then go on and branch out to your other values and come at them in a much more objective manner.
Yeah.
So you get to know yourself that way.
Yeah. So you approach it by what you genuinely like for yourself, which I think is something that's very difficult. I believe it's actually more difficult than people may think, because at least for me, and I know this for certain people I've met in my life, it's very easy to be taken in by the interest of other people, right? And you mentioned, for instance, a practice that I like, which is sometimes going to museums by yourself, because it will, allow you to have your own reaction, because we can easily be influenced by other people's reactions. I'm convinced that only maybe 20% of guys actually are in love with cars. The other 80% who say they love cars, are really just being a proxy to these other guys who really genuinely like it, who maybe they admire in some way. And they're just kind of like feeding off of that interest. They don't have a real deep passion for cars in and of itself and what a car does. Like, they're not the type of person that would take it apart, and they're like fascinated by how every part works together and all the different stories behind these old cars and things like that. Those guys, like Jay Leno, genuinely loves cars. If you ever watch him, he does. I bet even if there's not a camera on, he'll probably talk about cars. I can only imagine.
It's funny you should bring up cars, because my husband and I collect cars.
There you go.
And we collect English cars.
Ooh, okay.
And in fact, I was an award-winning editor of a Rolls-Royce magazine for 3 years. So and even before we met each other, we were both nuts for cars.
Yeah.
So, and you're right, because I've been at what we call meets. And there are people there who, everybody has to own a car that's a collector car. But those of us who really love cars, we talk about this. I mean, it took me 5 years to find my 1954 Jag XK120, because I wanted beauty rings, I wanted skirts, I had all these requirements. And if you talk to somebody, even who collects cars, they can talk about them, but unless they know about them, they don't love them.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there's something to, I think there's a lot of things like that in our lives. And, I'm sure there's some that I'm susceptible to. We're not, but my point is, overall, the difficulty of finding your true loves. One way I think that, is I don't want to spin a positive on the quarantine thing, but one thing for me that isolating me from certain activities that I've done in the past, what it's done is emphasize one or two deep things that I really do love, because I miss them so much. Like, I can't stop thinking about, there's one in particular I've talked on the show a lot, which is lifting weights. I can't go to a gym right now, and I don't have weights. So I'm daydreaming about how I can build my own little gym. That's and I've never thought about it, but it's just so, I've just grown over the last 10 years since I started lifting weights into such a passion. I really miss it. And
you can start lifting chairs in each.
I tried to. Yeah. There
or
is
a couch if you get desperate.
Yeah, I mean, just lift people up, just like put my dog up and go like this, go get like a
Right.
100, 50-pound dog or something. Yeah. And there are things like that you want to, but it's just like, there's something about the gym and the sounds and that really has resonated with me. And it's a deep value. And when I think about what the deeper value, if I peel that back for myself and listening to you, I think the deeper value is strength. Like I really admire in myself and
There
in
you
others
go.
strength. And I think that's something that is valuable. So anyway, I just
There
wanted,
you go. You just did it right.
yeah,
You went from lifting weights to a primary value, which is strength. Lifting weights is a means to exercise your primary value, or one of them, which is strength. So it's a means to that end, which is part of who you are.
yeah. And I just wanted to give that as an example to people. So I think that is a good process by which to, approach what you're talking about with finding your individual values. And it sounds like you have a lot of workshops and things like that, there are things out there. So, check out Alexandra York's work to kind of help further, because another thing you have to do is you have to separate your own true values from the values that are influenced by your parents, your culture, your teachers, your church members, and things that aren't your deepest personal values. And finding personal values, I think, is very important. And so I think I just wanted to kind of emphasize that about, your book and talking about values.
Well, it's crucial if you want to have secular spiritual experiences,
Yeah.
because until you, in the whole front part of my book is how to, with different exercise, they're not exercises, but approaches to nature, to art, and to a romantically beloved person. But in the next to the last chapter, in fact, just before the conclusion, that entire chapter is titled "Know Yourself, Know Thyself," and that chapter with that, because emotional or spiritual experiences are born from the automatic nervous system, which is what rules the emotions. They respond automatically. So what I do in that chapter is just what you said. I give exercises you can do that are opaque. They're not direct questions,
Mm-hmm.
but they're metaphorical or opaque questions that you can answer. And then when you're finished with it all, you can tear those back and see if they coincide with your conscious value system. It's sort of like a cross check.
When you also do, so I wanted to kind of give people a feel for the book, and let's kind of dive into that a little bit. You also do.
I have no cold. I'm just dabbing my nose.
Oh no, I know everybody is all freaked out whenever you cough. I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I'm healthy.
Yeah, you're healthy. That's good. I'm glad you're
I just
healthy.
have a runny nose.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure we all get that way. I was laying at in bed like early on, trying to get to sleep, and I kept coughing, and I'm pretty sure it's like it was a psychological thing where I was coughing and I was like, oh, I have the coronavirus. And it's like, no, I mean, I might have, I don't know. I didn't have a test, but, I was fine. I woke up feeling actually really refreshed. But the point is that I think we've all probably psychologically gone through this experience, which maybe we could talk about that at some point, this shared experience that we all have and what that might mean for us getting together future for soul celebrations together and overcoming something like this. And but maybe we can hold off on that because I wanted to get into the specifics of your book. And so one of the things I really liked, I mean, there's so much in this that was great, but you had this at the end of your chapters, or towards the end of the chapters, like on the nature chapter, you have how to have spiritual snacks in nature. So you actually have examples of, take a moment, focus, and actually listen to the music of rain or the songs of birds, right? Which you mentioned earlier. And then you have longer ones, longer examples of retrieve some small transportable natural object that you love and place it in your office or home for short revisits to a past spiritual experience. And you give some examples of rocks and, seashells and things like that you can have. So the idea of taking something out of nature, putting it in your home as a way to decorate and to kind of refresh your memory of some moment that you had in time, and that's one of the things that I liked about the book is you have these examples of what you could do to have a soul celebration, these examples of snacks, and then you have in the back of each chapter, like a space that you could actually write, almost like a journal, your own musings on your spiritual snacks in nature and your own notes on
The
doing
reason
that.
I did that is because once people use my approaches and get used to the process, without doubt, every single person will come up with their own.
Okay. Yeah.
It will happen.
Yeah.
It will happen. But could I take just a moment and explain how I got the idea of spiritual snacks?
Oh, yeah, please. I'd love to hear
Because it's not my idea.
Okay. Yes.
I came across, I'm saying 20 years ago, I came across a 16th century Italian cardinal, Cardinal Gilles of Viterbo, and this was the Renaissance, of course, and he used to, of course, at that time, they had already discovered the Greek manuscripts and the mythology and all that, which we see in the arts and so on.
Yep.
And he's the one who came up with the idea when he gave his stern sermons about religion and all that sort of thing. He spiked them with what he called spiritual snacks. And he would talk about, for example, I have in the book, Augustine in 4th century came up with the idea of a hunter in the woods trying to search for examples of spiritual, celestial examples on earth. So Gilles took the mythology that he now knew from Greek mythology, and he turned that into, now get this image, Diana, the goddess of the hunt.
Yeah.
But he portrayed her searching for religious fervor. But he portrayed her scantily clad, cheek flushed, rushing through the woods looking for God. And you can just imagine how his parishioners listened to that, and that stuck with them. So he used to spice up his sermons with all these little tidbits from secular and sexual mythology. And I said, you are brilliant. You're my best friend. So it's not my idea. I borrowed it from him.
No, that's wonderful. And I think it's, you mentioned in your book, you do marginalia, which I did with your book as well. I don't know if you can see it, quite a bit of marginalia in your book as well. I do that all the time. I have a note card system that I use that I got from a very popular nonfiction writer today. And, so I love that idea. And my point is that I think one way to get little soul celebrations, or I guess this would be a spiritual snack, in a sense, is to revisit if you're like me and you are deep readers, to revisit old friends, in a sense, old people that you've had good conversations with. That's how I look at reading a book. That's why I write in the margins, because it's it's kind of what I would say to them in that moment. Although obviously sometimes they're not around anymore and they've been dead for hundreds of years in this case.
You can still argue
with them. Exactly. And you can say, I don't agree with this, or that's wonderful. Or you get like those little insights that echo through the, eras, echo through generations. So I think that's a wonderful little spiritual snack. Another one you have that I think we can explore a little bit are poems that you've written. You have poems,
or other people wrote,
but I think you have several poems in your book they're all yours, right? That you wrote.
Yes, yeah. I open each chapter with one of my poems, yes. And the reason I do that is because a poem is a spiritual snack. So I open each one with one of my poems to sort of set the tone for that particular chapter.
Yes, and I mean that's obviously near and dear to my heart, and because we talk about poems on this podcast all the time, and I make the same basic argument. I've never called them a spiritual snack, but just what they can do to enliven, to enlighten, to bring into harsher contrast or clearer contrast some aspect of life. And yeah, I think the idea of they enhance your spirit is definitely true. And I think that's a great way to think about, especially these shorter poems, as spiritual snacks, like little snacks. They're not it's different than an epic poem like the Iliad or a novel like Gone with the Wind. And you kind of, I
Right.
think, mentioned that before we got on. It's one of my favorite novels, actually. And, so those are not quite a snack. Those are more like a, I don't know, like a hotel, like a bed and breakfast with, food morning, noon, and night. And you never leave. And you just kind of enjoy it all day. And it's like a blissful experience or something. So that's more.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah,
Actually.
it's much more intense and, but maybe more fulfilling in the long term. But these snacks are, I think, essential to, getting through the day and more on a daily basis. I would say you can't read a whole novel every day, but you can read, at least most days, a short little poem. So
You can do that, or what I do and suggest in the book as well is just rotate books, fiction, nonfiction, it doesn't really matter, in your study or your office coffee table, and from time to time just pick it up and open it up and see what you get.
Yeah, I think that's
and even
great.
if you just read a page or two or a small poem, it's instead of a coffee break, it's a spiritual break.
Yeah. Well, funny is my one of my main things that I do on my podcast is called Sunday Morning Poetry. And what I do is I read a poem on Sunday, or I record it usually on other days, but I release it on Sunday morning. And, the whole idea is, again, I don't go to church. And, if you go to church, that's great. You can listen to it afterwards. But the point is, there is something about that Sunday morning feeling of rejuvenation that I think is important. And I actually got this from a friend of mine who's a philosopher. And he said, he always wanted to do something with literature, on a Sunday morning. And there's also a famous poem that I've done early on in the show. I'll do again, called Sunday Morning by Wallace Stevens. Who, again, it's a long poem, so I won't read it or anything like that. But the general idea is this kind of, this woman, she's in like her morning little nightgown thing, her robe, and she's, having breakfast, and she looks outside, just like you talk about. She sees like the orange peels, she smells the coffee, and she looks at the birds, and there's a cuckoo bird in her house, and there's like, the freedom of it. And but it brings her into memory of, she's skipping church, I think is the idea of this story. And it brings her into these ancient times. And she's all of a sudden thinking about the kinds of ways that people have gained spirituality in the past, some of them bad, some of them good, for instance, sacrificing human people for a spiritual experience. And so it's this very profound poem about exactly what you're talking about. And I think, so I think there's a lot of connection. That's why I was excited about your work. And you have a lot of great poems in there, in your book, a lot of great spiritual snacks. So I thought I would read one, which I have here on the screen for people, and they could read along with me. If you're watching, if you're listening on, on podcast, I'll try and read it, slow, so you can make sure everything sounds clearly. And then, you could always get the book, which I recommend, to read this poem and other poems like it. So, okay, are you ready, Alexandra? I'm gonna do a little.
I am.
Okay, so this is.
I love to hear other people read my work.
Yeah, I know. That would make me a little nervous. I'm do my best if someone read, but that's why I don't do poetry though, so that's different. Okay, so this is "The World's a Sweet Balloon" by Alexandra York, and it comes in the chapter on nature and spiritual snacks. The world's a sweet balloon. Toss it in the air. Turn it in your hand. The world is round and wonderful. Sun and stars and singing, castles in the sand, valentines and fireflies. Their wonder is splendiferal if you open your eyes, if you open up your eyes. It's all yours, night and day. So review it, remake it, but live it, don't fake it. Time's a friendly tune. Play it with a flair. Ups and downs and all arounds. The music's light and fanciful. Mornings are beginnings, afternoons a joy. Evenings can be loving things, a whirl or lackadaisical. A day can be a toy. It's all yours, night and noon. So spin it or bounce it, but never renounce it. Sweet, sweet world, sweet meat world, it can be a balloon. This old world is a sweet balloon. There you go.
Lovely.
I hope you liked.
I really enjoyed that.
It's
the first time I ever heard anybody read my poem. It was really lovely. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Yeah, it's pleasant to read. I mean, I practiced. I messed up once. I apologize at the beginning, but I do recommend to people reading poems out loud because poems are meant to be heard. And this is a very playful poem. And it plays with sounds, it plays with metaphors and meanings, and that's what I like about it. And it's fun to read, and it has like little tongue things you have to play with to get them right, and then there is a cadence and a meter to it, which I tried to emphasize. So I thought it was a very pleasant, little snack. So there you go. People got a snack.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So thank you for the poem. And what would you, so I want to curious, because sometimes, it's always funny to think about what metaphors, especially with poets, because I think poets are the most playful with language. They can take it into fanciful realms sometimes, and it's like, whoa, what does this mean? Right. And so I'm always interested to like, where, this is playful. What do you mean by a sweet balloon? Like, cause you don't normally taste balloons. So I thought the connotation was really interesting to think about, because obviously there's a relationship between the balloon and the earth that you make, which I really like. And it's like we're floating out in space, we're on this balloon, and it's like a sweet thing. But I was wondering if you thought of something in specific when you were thinking sweet balloon.
When I use the word sweet in that context, I was thinking of it more as we would say, oh, isn't that sweet? Isn't he sweet? Aren't these flowers sweet? What we mean by that, we don't mean literally sugary, and we certainly don't mean saccharine, meaning soupy. What we mean is it's sweet in the sense that isn't it just perfectly lovely?
Yeah. Okay. So pleasant is obviously what you're going for. I think the funny.
Well, it's more than that. It's more than pleasant. It's because pleasant doesn't have an emotional connotation. Whereas if you find something sweet, a physical thing, not a sugary thing, that means it's a value to you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And in the imagery of your work, it's all about let me pop this up again so people can see it. Like the song, it goes along with your book very nicely, of course. You have nature, sun and stars singing, castles in the sand. You have valentines and fireflies. And then I assume you made up, there's a neologism, right? Is splendiferal? Is that a word?
No, I made it up.
Yeah. Which again is the poet's right but I know what you mean by splendiferal, right? It's something that, I can almost imagine like a young kid saying, like a young child saying, "Oh, it's splendiferal." It's like, that's not a word, but it's okay.
Sort of a combination between splendid and wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. And it just, but my point is that it has the feeling of a explosion of joy that you just kind of you mash two words that aren't technically a word, but we know what you mean, and it's just sounds that mean something very special and sweet. That's what I pictured as like a young child.
But the poem, it also has a serious note because it says, live it, don't fake it.
Mm-hmm.
And it says something about bounce it, but don't renounce it. So it has a little serious twist to it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's later down. And so I was just, my idea is that you start with these nature connotations and it feels like an explosion of joy in just being alive, like a child just enjoying nature. I think children enjoy nature better than most of us do. They kind of just roll around in it. They don't care about getting dirty. They don't care about what they look like. They just kind of, they see a puddle. It's like, I got to stomp that thing. Right. And they're just like full of, that's just why one of the joys of being, I was a teacher for a little while. One of the joys of being a teacher is just seeing children be children and not care about a lot of the things that we sometimes care about, and just kind of having pure joy in nature.
That's very well put, and I agree entirely.
And then you move on to talking about music and, the almost like a crescendo. That's why I think this poem is great, because it has like all the elements of your book in it, because you have music and art and how it goes up and down with the ups and downs and all arounds. The music's light and fanciful. And then, of course, you relate it back to this evenings can be loving things a whirl, or lackadaisical, a day can be a toy. So again, it's this kind of playful. But then, you get serious a little bit by making the point that I think we talked about earlier. It's all yours night and noon, so spin it or bounce it, but never renounce it, which I think is an important message to remember, to not give up in, there's something the Stoics used to call, I'm not a big fan of the Stoics overall, but they have some kind of ideas that are decent. And they have this idea of, there's alive time and there's dead time. And you should always, have the alive time. So sometimes things aren't in your control, like this, quarantine that we're in is not really in our control, but, you should still spin it or bounce it, but never renounce it, right? Like the life that we have, the joy that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely true. I have always said since I was a child, it's not what life deals you, it's how you deal with what life deals you.
Yes. And I think that's a good little message. I mean, that's the kind of message that you could write on a note card and just kind of, staple to your or staple, pin to your wall or something, just as a kind of, it's all yours.
Or carpe diem. That's a good one too.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, same kind of thing. And it's all yours.
Your idea of pinning up little things is a very good idea.
Yeah,
because that procedure will catch your attention unaware.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, if you've pinned something up, even on your wall, if it's tape it up, whatever, and it catches your eye, and you say, "Oh," and then that takes you for a moment to where that idea is, and that in itself is very refreshing.
And I think that's a good transition to one of the other things I wanted to talk about. The next and probably our last subject for this conversation is the art, because you have a lot about art in your book, and you have an art you have an art organization that you're the president of that we mentioned, and in terms of taping things up and putting things up, there's an argument. So I completely understand the idea that I really recommend to people go to museums and see paintings in their original form. There is a majesty that you cannot capture on a computer, even with a print, even a really good print. You cannot fully fathom a really good painting that is reproduced. There's something magical about the hand. You could see the paint popping from in a way that even the best of prints can't quite capture. And so I recommend that. Now, barring that, though, there is a very powerful reason to have artwork all through your house as much as you can. And if you can't afford an original Rembrandt, like most of us probably can't, then what you can get is a copy, a reproduction, and that allows you to, look at it, enjoy it, and have spiritual snacks on a regular basis. And I think it's something that we, I don't know if people sometimes take it as seriously as they could. When I go into most people's houses, I don't see much actual artwork. At most, I'll see a couple of, and I don't want to judge, people's, I don't know their opinions necessarily. But, like maybe some posters, which there's nothing wrong with posters necessarily, but like a movie poster or something like that, or some, chic thing, like a big photograph of some skyline is common, which is, again, nothing wrong with that because it can remind you of the city. But I encourage people to look into art because I think it gives you another method for approaching your life and the world that you live in that isn't
I
captured
think
otherwise.
it's more important than nature because art is, excuse me, a man-made product. And every work of art, good or bad, is an embodiment of the value system of the artist. And that will project into the work, even the garbage that you see everywhere. That artist's anti-value system is being made very clear. That artist is trying to destroy values. So his value is to destroy values. So it's absolutely clear. That's why I suggest when people go to a museum, they must go alone, no audio, nothing. Just wander. Your soul already knows. Just let yourself go, wander, wander, wander. And when something catches your eye and speaks to you and makes you say that, you take a breath and all of a sudden time is stopped and you go to it, you go to it, you go to it, you want to go in it. And that is a soul celebration because what you are doing is celebrating some very important value, and it's out there. It's out there for you to see. It's like seeing your soul in color in front of you, and the same with sculpture. So it's very important to go to the museum first and have the real time-stopped, empowering, blissful, expansive moment of seeing your own values right out there in front of you. If you do that first, then when you take a print of that painting or of the sculpture or something home, then when you look at it, that spiritual experience will not come at the same force that it did when you were in person. Because when you're standing there and you are loving that, you are loving yourself. So it's a very, very powerful thing. The only thing akin to it is a romantic love, because the artwork is static. And when you have a romantic love partner, then your values are in a living, breathing, scowling, laughing person, a human being. So you're seeing your own values alive in that person. So art and romantic love are the most important and ways to experience yourself really fully. I've always said, you show me the art someone loves and the person they love, and I can tell you all about them. So even when you go into these people's houses, like you talked about, and you don't think that they're there, but they are. Because as Aquinas said, the things we love tell us what we are. So even if they have something, what you consider to be bizarre in their house, that's their choice. And so it is an expression of them, even if you might not be able to discern it.
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of stories about that. And one that came back to me and kind of made me appreciate things that I didn't, like helped me grow, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, was I dated this girl a long, long time ago. And she was kind of obsessed with skulls. She liked the look of skulls. She liked to think about them. And it didn't dawn on me, like, I thought it was very weird at the time. That she had this.
Maybe it was just brainy.
Maybe it was brainy. But she had this obsession with death, I think, in general, that I thought was weird at the time. And it took me a long time and I've met people like this who, they take Halloween more seriously, not just from a party standpoint, but from like an actual, like what it really means to be scared. They love horror movies, and they're kind of obsessed with, not obsessed, I don't want to say that, but they like the images of death, and they take it seriously, I guess. And I thought this was a little weird at first when I was younger. And over time, and one thing I've come to learn is a book that has been really important to me that I've talked about on the show all the time is the Iliad. It's the thing that really got me excited about literature, and that it's a big love of mine. I've read it many times. I've taken courses on it. I'm very invested in what that book means and its meaning to us as Westerners and to me as an individual. And one thing the book has been called is the Book of Death, and it's about mortality and immortality. And part of what I think Homer is trying to emphasize in the way he contrasts the immortal gods with the mortals and their dilemmas of the mortals is the idea of how the mortals are framed by death, and that's all they're obsessed with, is thinking about this death thing and what they're gonna what's gonna happen and what's happening on life because of it. And so the stressing and the thinking about death is actually the thinking about the life you get, the one life you get. And it's more than just a reminder, it's a frame for saying that this is the kind of, death is inevitable, and it's a reminder, I think, of that, and it's an understanding of it. But my point is not to have a deep discussion about death, which I've had on the show many times, but to emphasize this growth that I've seen. Like, you're talking about going into people's houses and learning about them. It's also learning about yourself and kind of, it's because you can see a work of art and it might speak to you, but it might speak the wrong things at first. And then as you think about them, you grow. And so, I'm not putting skulls in my house or anything at the moment, but I have a deeper appreciation for those kinds of images because of my love for the Iliad and my love for, thinking about what really is life. And we get this one life, and we need to make sure we again, I have to bring the Stoics again. They have this term, memento mori, which is meditate on death. And the idea is to remember this is all going to be gone. So, look at the bird before he dies and before he goes away. Look at the spring before it fades into fall. Look at your life before you fade into fall, into spring, and into the grave, and enjoy every moment as much as you can and squeeze the life out of life, right? Live life to the least. That's a nice term.
I like that. Squeeze the life out of life.
Yeah. And so this is something I've learned in trying to think differently about things that I was at first reacted to somewhat, off putting, I guess. And that's one value you can get from, looking at art, I think.
Yes, definitely. Because if you see a work of art that you detest immediately, that means it's offending your value system.
Yeah.
So that is information as well. You won't enjoy it, but it is informative.
And you should think about why it offends it, right? Because
you must, absolutely.
I think the point I was trying to make is that if you find something that offends you, you may have a bad value system and the art may have a better value system. And if you think about it, that might actually impact your value system, right? You may think that this was good. I need to work on me, not this. I have this experience all the time with one of my other favorite authors, Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, where some people will have this really revulsive thing. And it's like, I think you need to think about it and enjoy it. I know you mentioned one of your recommendations is The Fountainhead for a deeper novel, along with many other great novels. So I think that, it's like if you read Cyrano de Bergerac and you're repulsed by Cyrano, it's not Cyrano's problem. That's your problem. There's something you got to work on.
That's very important. I'm glad you said that because you said it better than I could.
Okay, well,
It's very important to whatever your reaction, because emotions are automatic.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
And the emotions will tell you the truth about your value system. If your value system is messed up, you can find out that way as well.
Yeah.
So that's one of the values of confronting art, experiencing art, because art is a it's a language, it's a communication of values. So you can cross-check your own, as you just said, and take it backward or forward, however you seem to like to do it. But after the emotional physiological experience, because my theory relies on the mind-body integration.
Yes.
So
What is
many
that?
rely
Can you
on the
explain that?
separation. Well, when you have a spiritual experience, when you have any emotional reaction, that radiates. It begins in the brain, but it radiates throughout the entire body. So your emotions are they only evaluate, is this good, is this bad? They good for me, bad for me. It's a an identification, an evaluation, and a conclusion. The emotion does all that in lightning like speed so that you don't know the process, you just feel. And any emotion, it also radiates through the entire body. So for a secular spiritual experience, it's very important that the mind and body are integrated, and you experience, when you have these soul celebrations or even these little snacks, you not only feel emotionally, but your whole body tingles, you're alive, and you feel your body as clearly as you feel the emotions coming from your heart. Let's say your head, heart, and body. But it's a whole person experience. And I think that's really the key. And if you back down, if you go back to your emotional experience, whether it be spiritual or not, you can have a lot of emotional experiences that are not spiritual. If you go back to those emotions, break them down into what was it, as you said, go back to the painting. What is it you didn't like about it?
Mm-hmm.
That is informative about your own value system. So the art has such powers in that regard. And unlike a romantic love, for example, who is moving and acting and thinking and reacting, the artwork will stand still for you forever.
Yeah,
And you can go back and revisit it again and again, and it's the same.
yeah.
So you can find more in it the next time. As you said, you can grow yourself by revisiting again and again, experiencing those experiences, figuring out why you are. I mean, there's nothing like art for that. Nothing.
Yes, we're 100% on the same page. We both have art organizations, and so I thought we would end by talking about art21.org. And this, so you have some art on there. Actually, tell me what art21.org is and what you're trying to accomplish. And then hopefully we have some time. I wanted to show and maybe quickly discuss one of these interesting painting sculptures you have. So on the website. So tell people, I'm going to actually show them art21.org, the website, a little bit while you're talking about it, if that's okay.
This is a 501c3, which is IRS exempt arts foundation, educational arts foundation. It's based in New York, but we have done exhibits elsewhere other than New York as well. And our mission is we are dedicated, the name of it is American Renaissance for the 21st Century, which is what gave me the acronym ART. Took me 3 months to come up with that. But American Renaissance for the 21st Century is the name of the foundation. And the reason I founded it, and the reason I named it that is because I wanted to make, although we champion representationalism in the visual arts, melody and harmony in music, meaning, coherence in literature, I didn't want it to look as if we were looking back to another period in time. What we are doing is championing artists, composers, writers who are working in the established Western art forms, but moving to the future, taking it, advancing it into the future. So that's why I established. I started on it in 1991, and it was approved by the government in 1993 as a 501c3. So our goal is we're dedicated to a rebirth, renaissance, of beauty and life affirming values in all of the fine arts. So we champion artists who are working contemporary, living, breathing, contemporary meaning alive, not the other meaning of contemporary
Yeah.
today. Artists who are working in the established Western art forms, but we only focus, well, first of all, as far as I know, we're the only philosophically based arts foundation. And the reason we're philosophically based is because we only champion work that it honors beauty and life affirming values. So a work of art can be exquisitely done, but if it's about the dark side, it may be valid art and it may be appreciated by many people, but it's not what we champion. We champion beauty and uplifting art. And so that is our mission. And the reason I started it was because it seems like 100 years ago, but in the late 80s and the early 90s, representational artists and composers who wrote melody, they couldn't get arrested. The modernist art had taken over since the Armory show in the early part of the 20th century. I mean, it wasn't even being taught in most arts schools anymore. So at that time, I established the foundation, and I have wonderful advisors in every field. But I established it to champion these artists because they were being ignored. And that is the reason it began. And then we started the magazine, Art Ideas, and that went out to all of our members. And so we were disseminating the idea that beauty and life affirming values are alive today. We don't need to look at the past. We are alive and moving these things forward now as we speak. So that's the larger picture of the foundation. And on the website, there are art exhibits we've produced, catalog essays. Under publications, there are probably more than 30 articles that can be read free. So it's got a lot of good stuff on it.
Okay. I think that's wonderful. So one of the things people could do is they can go to art galleries, and you have, let's say, The Legacy Lives, Romantic Realism, Vision of Values. And I thought we could talk about one of the pieces of art that you have on your page, artist featured in the catalog. This is called Reaching, and by Ivan, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly.
Evangelos Fridakis.
And then tell me, so I'm going to pop this on the screen so people can see it clearly. But there's also something that you could do on the page I've never seen before, which is you could have the sculpture itself, which is a woman reaching down. She's on like a little, it's a bronze, right? It says bronze.
Yes.
Yeah, it's bronze. Oh, it says bronze on carved marble right there. And she's kind of reaching down to something, right? Then if you move your cursor underneath it, there's a painting called Bald Head, Maine by Frank Mason. And when you put them together, you move your cursor away from the painting or the sculpture, it has her floating kind of above the sea. So for those listening, I'm trying to describe it for you. So it's this woman, a nude, it looks like, and her hair is flying back, and she's reaching down with two fingers. She's stretching her arm, reaching down, and it looks like with the combination of the painting that she's trying to scoop up something or in the ocean almost. So it's a very interesting painting. I thought I'd like to hear, because I've never seen that before, right? I've never seen the integration of sculpture and painting like that. I know the ancient Greeks did something like that where they would actually paint their sculptures, but we don't know how they did it because the paint, faded away, obviously. But they supposedly did some kind of painting on them. So I'm just curious,
Oh, definitely. They were brightly painted, in fact.
okay. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the motivation or like what it means and, your thoughts on this process.
Reaching is one of the most beautiful pieces of sculpture by, until recently, in my view, the greatest living sculptor in America, Evangelos Froudakis, who died just about a year ago now at age 94. And this piece, in fact, I own number one of the small version. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Brook Green Gardens.
Yes.
Art Museum. Well, it's the largest American art museum in the world for American art. And this piece, I got the commission for Angelo to do, we called him Angelo, to do this piece in over life size to be placed at Brook Green Garden. And one of the members of my foundation funded it. So we were able to bring about an over life size piece of this that is now in Brook Green Gardens, and she's on a piece of granite there and reaching into the water. So she sees her reflection in the water. I have written extensively about this piece because she is, to me, she's a quintessential 20th, 21st century American nude. She's educated and exercised both. She's full of curiosity. Whatever she's reaching for, she has purpose, and she wants to know about this. So that's why we named it Reaching. Now, the reason so the original piece of sculpture, I have mine here in this house on a sort of a cloudy mirror. But down in Brook Green, it's on a huge pool, not fountain. So she sees her reflection. But the reason I wanted to do this montage on the website is because I chose her, and all of the art is this way, as you know, if you move your cursor over to the right. But I wanted to choose sculpture and paintings that seemed to speak to each other in some regard. So the reason I told Frank, and Frank is now deceased as well, unfortunately, he's one of the great, great painters of the 20th century. He taught at Art Students League, and his students are now carrying on the torch, if you will. But the bald head mane seemed to me, so to answer your big question, the reason I wanted to do this little side show, as it were, is to show a relationship between sculpture and painting and how they can have a meaning aside from their individuality for each other. So the reason I chose to put her above Frank's bald head mane is you really nailed it, because what it shows, if you look at her face, the intelligence, the purpose, the confidence in her face, and she is going after whatever she finds. It could be to touch the water. It could be to skim a wave. It could be to find an object. It could be to touch a stone. It could be anything in the world, but it's woman in complete harmony with nature and interacting with nature and being part of nature. So that is why, as I said, the reason I wanted to do that with all the sculpture and painting was to show interrelationships. But in this particular one, that's why I had her reaching down into the water, because the ocean is endless, and she's not endless, but she's reaching for everything that's in nature to please her, to satisfy her curiosity.
And she's kind of at one with nature, being nude, right? She's not encumbered by other things. It's like, Venus coming out of the ocean type of a feeling. And the next thing Venus does is she tries to investigate the world that she just landed on type thing, right? It has that kind of
Right. Well,
feeling.
that's a very good point, because she is as
Aphrodite, yeah.
natural as nature is.
Yes.
She is as natural as nature
Yeah.
is. And you talked earlier about having something in your study or your workplace to remind you of that. And my study in this house is on the third floor, so I call it my cellar in the sky. But I have this sculpture down in the living room. In fact, in reality, but here, should I hold it up so you can see it?
If you have, yeah. Let me see.
Here, just to prove your point, I took this off the wall while you were talking, just to prove the point that you made earlier, and I make as well. If you have a print or a photo of something you really, really feel spiritual about, if you put it in your workplace, you can visit it so you can see that I have framed this, and I have it right here on my wall, so that I can, even though the sculpture itself is downstairs, I can visit it. It's right above my computer.
Yeah.
And I can visit it and have that spiritual surge, and then I feel I can write anything now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. I think when I was younger, I definitely underestimated the environment that you work and live and do everything in, and how it impacts you. I would people would make fun of me, but I had like this townhouse, and I mean, when I say younger, this wasn't even that long ago. It was like 3 years ago, but I had this place in Texas, and
that's how fast you're growing. Huh?
Well, I think I just didn't think about certain things. Like, I'm always trying to improve. Like, I loved art at the time, but I never took the time to get little prints and put it. But I had like a lot of space in this one place that I had, because I was living in Texas and I could afford practically a mansion compared to what I live in California and Bay Area.
I'm sure.
And I just remember like I had a visitor come over, and I had like very little. I had like the bare necessity of furniture. It was like 1 or 2 chairs for the dining room table. I didn't even have a sofa at the time, because I didn't care. Like, for me, I just wanted to write. I didn't want to stay there forever. I ended up staying a little longer than I expected, but I had so much opportunity to put up paintings everywhere. And at some point I did have a friend who, was going through something, and she needed a place to stay. So she, was a roommate for a couple months, and she completely decorated it. I was like, wow, okay, I kind of see the difference, why I should stop being such a crazy bachelor. Because the only thing I had that was beautiful for me was I had shelves and shelves of books. Like, that was my thing. I had like 6 shelves filled with books in my office, and that was
your best friends.
And I put like little, like very grody, just me handwriting on a piece of paper, a quote I like, and just putting it up all over on that place. And that was it. But there's so much you could do with not a lot of, it doesn't cost that much. And so I just encourage people, and I'm going to be doing this better myself to get.
But it doesn't even have to be a serious work of art or a print of a serious work of art. We started out by talking about what to do during this shutdown period, and you, I'm sure, at that period of time had some little treasures, a vase or a special cup or something.
Yes.
And in this period of time, one of the things people can do, even if they don't have art, or even if they're absolutely alone, they can find some object that they like and give it a special place. If it's cluttered with other things, take it out. Put it on a cloth. Give it a special place. And then you can sit down and have a cup of tea and contemplate that object, and just something you could do now that you might not have the time to do if you have to go to a job every day. And you can say, now, why is that object special? And you can look at it and examine it and say, that vase has a real sculptural shape to it. And look at how the shadows are hitting it. And you can see even a simple object that isn't inherently, it doesn't have values screaming out at you, but it still brings pleasure to you because it's between you and you. You bought that, or you stole it, or you acquired it one way or the other.
Uh-oh.
But if it's there in
Don't
your
steal
house,
it.
it has some reason.
Yeah.
No, don't
I know.
steal it.
Yeah, I agree.
Unless it's a real piece.
Okay. Um,
You know that it's already starting. They've started to, during this period of time, there have been robberies at
I
some
heard of,
museums.
yeah, I've heard. I mean, I
Uh,
imagine this would
yeah,
be heyday for them. You gotta, you know,
it's
less
all
less
closed
people
up.
in there like during the day, and
Yeah,
so in the
yeah,
past they might only have 4 hours to get get their thievery done. Now they have a lot more time because they're all
right.
closed. So, yeah, I think that's intensely important that we protect that work. Um,
Oh,
you
absolutely.
know,
Because it's not only history. It's just to pound that subject. It's it's an embodiment of values.
yeah.
So that's what it's there for. And it's the fact that it's beautiful is a great bonus.
Yes, I agree. So we need to, I'm very sympathetic to helping out museums and making sure they can afford security to keep the thieves from selling it to some, foreign individual who's just, going to keep it in his study that nobody else could see it and he didn't buy it legally. So I don't
Except
like that.
what you find at museums these days. They're not open right now, but all over the world, and I've been to all of them. The guards are all looking at their telephones.
Mm.
They aren't looking at what anybody visiting is doing at all.
Hopefully they've improved that during this time.
Well, they're closed now, but this is the same with the police force. In Italy, France, New York, wherever I've been, the policemen are standing around looking at their phones.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's a subject on its own, but
yeah, I mean another discussion for another time about phones and their effect because I sympathize, but they may be doing some work or like getting
no,
a
no, no,
report
they're
from
not.
something.
They're not,
O-
trust me.
Okay,
But anyway, the only reason I bring it up is because of the guards in the museums.
yeah.
It's the
So we need to
artwork
support the
that's
museums
so
so they can protect that art. Is what I hope they're doing. And that's important. And
definitely.
for your own sake, everybody, get some artwork for your own house. And if you need reading, I recommend Soul Celebrations and Spiritual Snacks by Alexandra York. I think it's, again, and you can flip around, you could skip chapters and go to a chapter on family and home, because I think that's important for right now and how to get more. So we didn't even talk about that. Or romantic love, people are talking about how couples are together and they're fighting more because they're together more often. So maybe you can use some exercises from there and kind of revisit why you're in love. And so there's a lot to this book. And now that we're quarantined, is definitely a good time. Alexandra, any last parting thoughts or things that you're working on you'd like to talk about before we sign off here?
This work took a long time to put together, but I would like to say just a word about how I arrived at this. Could I do that?
Yeah, sure. Of course.
Well, my personal journey was, I think, fascinating. I started it when I was 9 years old because my mother insisted I go to church Sunday school for 3 years. And to be very frank, I was absolutely boy crazy, and I loved Superman and the Lone Ranger, and I just couldn't warm up to Jesus. And that's not to offend anyone who's religious at all. It was just a little 9-year-old girl. But I loved the Bible. It had ideas in it. It was fascinating to me. So throughout my entire high school, I studied every religion you can imagine, even Zoroastrianism, which most people haven't even heard of. And by the time I was 17 and went to college, I took some courses in comparative religion to see if I was correct in my understanding. But in a philosophy course, that's where I met Aristotle. And at 17, he so emphasized the self, the improvement of the self, the celebration of the self, the development of the self. And I related to this so deeply that it's by having him be my tutor all these years, that I finally realized that all of the religions had this one thing in common. They all strove to connect with an other, A-N-O-T-H-E-R, whether it be a god, a deified prophet, or something of that nature. So it was through Aristotle's focus on this here on earth reality that made me come to the idea of, instead of connecting and merging with some supernatural or other ephemeral thing out there, that you could connect with here on this earth entities, nature, art, and another human being, and have the true secular spiritual experience here on earth now with real live entities. So it was Aristotle who brought me to that, and then Thomas Aquinas, the things that we love tell us what we are. Mm-hmm. So he was the one who congealed my idea into, what we love is an embodiment of our values. So that's how I got to putting together that book.
All right, that's great. And I think, again, it's a book that is, fun but also deep to think about your values and how you approach the world, which is important to what values are to you. And to get those little soul celebrations and soul snacks. So on that, everybody, thank you so much for watching or listening. Go check out that's the horizontal line, the small little horizontal line.
That's the short one.
The short one, art-21.org. And, look at the work that Alexandra York is doing. There's also many of her books at the bottom I showed on the screen, so you could see other works that she's done. And, stay tuned for more at Troubadour Podcast. We're going to be doing a lot of these, and I want to be doing, maybe I'll incorporate the term soul snacks into my Sunday morning poetry a little bit, since you stole it from a 17th
spiritual
century.
Snacks.
Sorry, spiritual snacks. You stole it from a 17th century.
No, I borrowed it.
Yeah, you borrowed it. I'll borrow it from you occasionally because that's a really good term.
You are welcome to have it.
I really like it. So thank you very much for your time, Alexandra, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure.